We are here today gathered for a book discussion on Secularism Confronts Islamism, Divergent Paths of Transitional Negotiations in Egypt and Tunisia. Before we begin, I would like to brief everyone about the Center for Studies of Plural Societies, or CSPS. The CSPS is founded under the aegis of Humanity International Foundation, or HIF, as an independent nonprofit educational research training center in New Delhi to promote the culture of scientific social research. CSPS is evolved and established as a fully independent, autonomous research institution and has no direct or indirect links with any government, political, religious, or business interest. CSPS believes in diversity and plurality of ideas and disciplines. It values plurality as a core value to harmonize the diversity of the Indian society. Dr. Omair Anas is the director of CSPS. He was earlier associated as a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs, New Delhi, which is a think tank of India's Ministry of External Affairs. Dr. Anas received his PhD from the Center of West Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi in 2015. He has also completed his MPhil from the same center. He has published 30 papers in international journals and edited volumes, and more than 200 articles in national and international media on international affairs. Dr. Mohammad Affan is the director, research of Sharq Strategic Research. He holds a PhD from the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, the University of Exeter. He obtained his MA degree in comparative politics at the American University of Cairo. His thesis was published in Arabic as a book titled Wabsim and the Brotherhood, The Conflict on the Concept of the State and the Legitimacy of Power. His research interests also include Islamism and democratization in the MENA region. Now, a bit about the book, Secularism Confronts Islamism. This book provides an in-depth examination of the recent confrontation between Islamists and the secularists in Egypt and Tunisia. Presenting a new approach to understand Islamism and secularism, the research addresses the variables that could affect the outcome of transitional negotiations. The secularist Islamist conflict proved to be a major hindrance for democratization and a main source of political instability in the Middle East. During the Arab Spring, disputes between both political trends sparked shortly after getting rid of their common enemy, the autocratic rulers. First, they disagreed on how to lead the transitional period. Then, polarization grew deeper with the political competition in the parliamentary and presidential elections, and the ideological disagreements during the drafting of the constitution. Eventually, this conflict put Tunisia at a verge of a civil strife in the summer of 2013 and led to the collapse of the transitional process in Egypt after the military coup. Examining the causes of the conflict between the secularists and the Islamists during the transitional period, this work provides new insights from the Arab Spring experience. Updating the transition literature, this book is a key resource to academics and students interested in democratization theory and the Middle East politics. Over to you, professors. We can begin with the book discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you very much for all of organizers. And let me begin by convey my special thanks to Dr. Mohammad Affan, who has agreed on a very short notice to give us this book discussion. And I think that this kind of book discussions actually deserve to be on a physical mode also, so that we could have enjoyed far more frank and longer discussions with the author. However, given the situation of COVID-19, we have got used to such online platforms, and also they are becoming very useful. So I must thank you, Dr. Affan, for this opportunity for our Indian scholars, friends, and many people who are joining from outside. And there are many scholars who are doing PhD in West Asian and Middle Eastern affairs. There are many scholars of Islamic studies, and there are many scholars of sociology and political science. the curiosity on the subject, especially the subject of confrontation between Islamism and secularism, it is such a subject, such a curious subject, which has attracted a lot of attention since the, especially I should say, since the attack on World Trade Center in 2001. And we have been saying so many debates that there are many trends within Islamism which are fighting against each other, and whether Islamism is against secularism, and so many books on the theme of whether Islam is compatible to democracy or not, whether Islam is compatible to secularism and other liberal ideas. So many books on similar themes have been written since then. And the debate is going on, and it is not coming to an end. Of course, the biggest challenge of such a debate is that there are many stakeholders in such debates. There are those who are policymakers in Western countries. So they treat this subject primarily as a subject of national security. They treat the subject whether how much Islamism is posing a threat to their national securities. And as a result, their entire academic approach is, I should say, is occupied by finding the security challenges within Islamist discourses. They are little concerned, or they are not at all concerned about the sociological discourses within Islam, and what, for example, Talal Asad has widely discussed about the discursive traditions of Islam. They are not interested at all in this discussion. So the Western stakeholders, they have a certain approach towards this discussion: Islam and secularism, Islam and democracy. Then there are the second stakeholders, which are the primary stakeholders, I should say, the people who are living within Islam or who are living with Islam, especially in the countries of Middle East. And for them, the subject of Islam is not just about religion, but also about their day-to-day rights of dignity, jobs, and basic needs. The reason is that most of the Middle Eastern countries have been ruled by very authoritarian regimes who have used the name of Islam as a threat to their regime's survival. So as a result, the Islamist discourse in the Middle Eastern countries has been seen pro-government versus anti-government. And all of those who are using religious discourses, narratives, they are being considered as a threat to stability and the survival of the regime. So again, the securitization of Islamic discourse has also happened in the Middle Eastern countries, and especially by the regimes. So we can see this the huge impact of securitization of Islamism discourse, or the academic discourse on Islamism, both in the Western countries and in the authoritarian Western Middle Eastern countries. The change started, or could have started, I should say also a little earlier, started in Turkey when the Islamist government of AK Party, they started merging Islamism and market values together, and they brought a new model of Islamism and democracy. And people started saying that, yes, there is a possibility of compromise, a reconciliation, or a kind of understanding between Islamism and democracy. And after some time, the Arab uprisings started happening, and the people, again, they said perhaps Turkey is going to be an example for these countries, and perhaps this is an opportunity for Islam to prove that Islam can be in compliance or in conciliation with democracy, secularism, and other values, including market economy. So there was a period from 2010 to 2013 was a period of huge curiosity, welcome, and optimism when so many negotiations were being conducted. So this is the time when people are talking about how Islam can be made compatible with many other things. So constitutional debates were going on. People were talking about democratic structures, institutionalization of democracy. They were talking about social values. They were talking about religious values. They were talking about women's rights. So there are so many discussions on Islam, on the relation between Islam and secularism and modernity. So many elements, many welcoming elements were included in the constitution of, for example, Tunisia, and then the constitution of Egypt. And then after 2013, a more violent phase started. Then when the counter-revolution in Egypt happened, and a brutal, very violent, and very suppressive military coup happened in Egypt, and everything which was achieved in 2011 February was effectively reversed, and the country Egypt turned back to the same point, or rather far more brutal point where it was in December 2010. So the negotiation or the transition from an authoritarian regime to democratic Islamism or some kind of conciliation has come to an end. And the story we now say, the story was of change was being reversed. And this in this short time, so many things have happened. And there are not many people who have documented the story of negotiation, the intense dialogue between Islamism, secularism, and many social actors and stakeholders within Egypt, within Tunisia. I should say this is a time when first time the Middle Eastern societies, especially Tunisia and Egyptian people and stakeholders were talking to each other. They were having a kind of free and fair dialogue with each other to claim each other's rights, what they should have, what the other party should have. And in these dialogues of transition, a new understanding was supposed to emerge. And this was the dialogue which I should say was not guided by the securitization discourse on Islamism and secularism. So many Islamist people were appearing very welcoming to secular values. For example, if you see Rashid Ghannouchi of Tunisia, he appeared far more pro, like a feminist Islamist person in Tunisia, and he included many articles in the constitution which were considered a fresh change within the Islamist discourse. And similarly in Egypt, many things were happening. So I should say that in this very long time, and Affan, Mohammad Affan, my friend in Turkey, who is heading this Sharq Strategic Center, who has been observing these development very closely and who has been studying all of these dialogues and negotiations within civil societies, within state actors, and within many other international and national players. And he has documented this entire transition and the discourses within these transitions which have taken place in Egypt and in Tunisia. He has surveyed most of the constitutions and the previous constitutions. He has also debated, discussed the academic discourses of Islamism, the people who have written about the idea of democracy and secularism. At the same time, he has also documented the academic point of view from the secular camp, which were trying to compete with each other. So I should say that perhaps this book is going to be very interesting, and it should be considered as the first book which has documented very academically all of these discussions and how these dialogues have taken place between Islamist camp and the secularist camp. And that documentation, I must say, must have been very interesting for him as a scholar, as an observer, and as a believer in democracy and reform. So I think that this is one of the most wonderful opportunities for us to listen from an author who has been through a long journey of observing revolutions and then documenting the experiences, the academic discourses, and then writing them into a most academic way. And he has applied a very intense methodological studies in his book. So we can see that the kind of intensity of arguments in this book is going to be creating a new academic discourse within the relationship of Islam and secularism. And in this way, I must also say that such books this book is going to bring back Islamism and the debate between Islamism and secularism from the securitization influence. And we are at the point where we can talk about and discuss about the relation between Islam and secularism in much fairer and much freer place. And here we are with the author, Mohammad Affan, who is going to talk about his book. And I must thank you very much for this opportunity and for having agreed to interact with us. And I must not stop between you and our audiences. So I should welcome you and stop here to listen you, Dr. Mohammad Affan. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Omair, dear brother, for this invitation. And really, I feel honored to be among you today and to join this discussion with you today. The book just was released 1 month ago and maybe 4 weeks ago. And then I found that there is an interest and I found an audience in India interested in my book, which is obviously in Middle East politics. So this is an extra honor and extra privilege to join you today. And really, this is an opportunity not to discuss something related to Middle East, in my opinion. And this could be the explanation why your center is interested in a book about Islamism and the secularism. Because as Dr. Omair said, that the issue of Islamism and the secularism is no longer an issue related to the Middle East. It's one of the themes that is important, maybe in many countries all over the world, and also the theme of democratization. Now, with the decline of the democratic ideal all over the world, the idea of how to maintain and how to push for democracy is an important issue. Also, the issue of negotiations, because also one of the common features in maybe many countries that there is a polarization. When we can see this polarization in USA, we can see this in Europe between ultranationalism and progressive leftists and in many places. So here the virtue of negotiations and the compromise is important. And these three major themes, Islamism and secularism, the democratization and negotiations and the compromise, these are the major themes in my book. And that's why it's relevant to not only the people and researchers in the Middle East, but I think it's relevant to many people worldwide. So if you allow me to show my presentation. So yes, this book is, and the idea of this book came to me during just maybe a few months after the collapse of transitional process in Egypt. At that time, I was still an activist. I was not that much engaged in academia. And this tragedy of collapse of transitional process in Egypt, like this was in early 2014 when I started to think about this project and how can I do an academic research to understand what went wrong with the Egyptian transitional process. And I started this project like after 1 year, 1.5 years at University of Exeter in my PhD, and I like finished my PhD 2020, like 1.5 years ago, and then the book came out, as I said, 1 month ago. The idea here of this book, actually, it was an attempt to understand the recent confrontation between Islamists and the secularists in Egypt in comparison to what happened in Tunisia during the transitional period, and simply three major questions where there is one major research question here. Why did Islamists and the secularists in Tunisia succeed in reaching a political compromise during the transitional period while they failed in Egypt? This was the major question in this research. But then three like minor questions or three detailing questions came out of that. The first question was, what exactly do Islamism and secularism mean in the context of Arab Spring? Because this was part of the debate. This was part of the conflict, the vagueness of the meanings of such thick and complex concepts like Islamism and secularism. This was integral part in the conflict in the Middle East after the Arab Spring. Then, who negotiated with whom on what? So now we have two camps, Islamists and the secularists, and they disagreed on some point. So what were these points? And how the issue of Islam and Sharia emerged during these negotiations and during a national dialogue. Then, and this was the core question in my research, what were the variables that affected the course and the outcome of negotiation in Egypt and Tunisia? How can we? This was actually my own personal quest. That what? How if the chance comes once again for a new transition, and in this transition, of course, all socio-political actors will engage in negotiation regarding the new regime and the foundation of the new regime. How can we guarantee as much as we can the variables for or the prerequisites for successful negotiation and to reach a compromise? So this was the sole question that I had. We need to know exactly how can we provide the appropriate circumstances, the appropriate prerequisites for successful negotiations during transitional period when chance becomes once again in Egypt or any maybe Middle Eastern countries to rethink about how can we establish a democratic order. So the whole research is about these three major questions: defining Islamism and the secularism, defining the points of disagreement during the transitional period, and then defining the factors that affected the course and the outcome of these negotiations. Before going to this, to discuss the answers to these questions, of course, because I know that most of you are either researchers or students at political departments. This is a small hint on the research design. This research design simply is a comparative politics research, classical comparative politics approach, with a small n, I mean small number of cases, 2 cases, and then we have more intense and less extensive case studies. And choosing Tunisia and Egypt was not, of course, a random or a haphazard selection. It's based on the methods of difference or most similar system designed, as mentioned by John Stuart Mill. Egypt and Tunisia are similar in many regards: the nature of their pre-transition regime, the nature of the Arab Spring itself, the popular uprisings during the Arab Spring. The major division during the transitional period was classically ideological between Islamists and the secularists, and the tribal factor or the sectarian factor was not there like other cases like Yemen or Syria or other or tribal factors like in Libya. So these two countries are very similar in many respects, except the phenomenon under examination. The nature of or the course and the outcome of negotiations in Egypt. And this is important for time frame because we know now Tunisian experience is facing like very setback, very unfortunate setback. But my concern was during the transitional period. So the time limit or the time frame was clearly defined. In Egypt, between General Revolution till the military coup in July 2013, which was a clear sign of failure of compromise and failure of transitional process. And in Tunisia, the time frame started with a revolution of 14th of January 2011 till January 2014, when all political or significant political actors and political parties agreed on the constitution, agreed on the consensus government. So this, by many, according to many definitions, this was the end of transitional period in Tunisia. Here, the theoretical approach to this question, we have this always debate between the structures and the agents. So, in the structural approach, the political behavior is just like a reflection of some structural necessities that the decisions taken by different actors. It reflects the some like class determinants or socio-political or political economy, I mean, or other structural necessities. So this is the structural approach. Agent approach, it focuses more on the agent and the will of the people and the skills of elites involved in the political process, and marginalize the importance and significance of the structural variable. So between these two extremities, we have this concept of structural contingency, which look at the structure itself to understand the background structure, but at the same time, it gives the agents their autonomy as like variables that should be examined for its own. So structural contingency simply means that we need to examine two different sets of variables affecting the political behavior and affecting decisions made by the elites. First, the structural background, the confining setting of structural variables, and then the agents' quality and the personality and their personal idiosyncrasies in some time. So here, this is simply the research design, the research approach, comparative politics. These studies are chosen based on methods of difference, and the theoretical approach was a structural contingency that mixes both sets of variables, structural and agent or actor-centric. Simply, it's, as I said, after giving this academic grounding, after giving this academic grounding, the chapters try to answer these three major questions. Chapter 2 tried to answer the question of what does Islamism and the secularism mean in the context of the Arab Spring. Chapter 3 and 4 was about who negotiated with whom and what. So all causes of disagreements examined in these two chapters, and the whole list of negotiations and national dialogues and all attempts to have supra-constitutional pacts or agreements, all these attempts were surveyed and examined to understand how the issue of Islam and Sharia was debated and examined during this period. And the chapters 5, 6, and 7, in these chapters, three sets of variables. One related to the macrostructural variable. These variables related to the nature of the regime and the nature of transitional administration itself. Mesostructural variable is the variable at the level of societal or intermediary organizations like civil society organizations and the political parties. And then the third one is micro-agentials or actor-centric variable, which focus on the quality of the leaders and the quality of the elites involved in the negotiation process itself. So this was the outline of the book chapters. Starting with the question of what does Islamism and the secularism mean in the context of Arab Spring, here there are four arguments. First, the first argument related to secularism, because of course you know that many scholars refused this idea that secularism couldn't be applied to the Islamic context, because this concept is Western concept, is coined in the Christian context, so we can't really borrow this concept to be used in our in Muslim communities and in Muslim societies. But in this book, I made an argument. I have another contention that no, secularism actually is a valid concept to be used in Arab and in Muslim context. But in this regard, we shouldn't understand secularism as separation between church and the state, or separation between the politics and religion, because simply there is no church in Islam. But the idea here is that we need to understand the secularism as an attempt to reproduce Islam based on the conditions of modernity. So it's an attempt to modernize Islam, but in this modernization, the Islam will be reshaped according to the paradigm and according to the structure of modernity. And then, according or within this structure, Islam should be rationalized based on the rationality of enlightenment. The metaphysical part should be downgraded for the sake of this world, and socio-political organization should be in the center of the discussion within the Islamic movement, and all afterlife issues or metaphysical issues related to the creed or to the theology should be sidelined a little bit. And also within this setting, religious should be subordinated to the political and not the other way around. So the state should be should have the upper hand over religion and over religious institution and over religious scholars. So secularism, simply, as I said, it's an attempt to reproduce Islam based on these conditions of modernity and control its manifestations, control its socio-political functions, as much, even not only in the public sphere, but even in some extreme forms of secularism, even to control the religious manifestation and impact on private spheres. So this is number one. Secularism could be applied to the context of Muslim communities, but we should redefine it in appropriate way. The second argument here related to the Islamism, and here Islamism doesn't mean simply Islam, or doesn't mean the comprehensive Islam. Islamism simply means it's a modern phenomenon, reflects the political ideology, points to or refers to a social movement that came with new set of ideology inspired by the Islamic Sharia, and mobilize people and have this not only the content of ideology itself, but even the ways of mobilization and the way of resource mobilization is in the name of Islam. And this is a modern phenomenon. In the pre-modern societies, Islam was there, and Islam also plays important roles in socio-political life. But at that time, it was in the form of norms, in the form of traditions, in the form of separate injunctions. But here, in case of ideology, even the ideology itself as a format, it's a modern set. And here, the religious or the committed Muslims in the modern age started to do this recensus of or reproduction of Islamic rules or Sharia rules regarding socio-political arrangements, and come up with this idea of Islamic ideology. So this is the second argument in this book. Of course, there are many details in the book, but this, in short, the second argument. Third argument here, that secularism and Islamism do not mean a specific political ideology. Actually, they are two casual, loosely bound domains. Within under the concept or under the banner of secularism, you can find the many orientations and the many variants. And the same also goes for Islam. So this, in this table, actually, in my research, I tried to do survey to see all different categorization of secularism. And you can find different types. I categorize them into 4 major types: anti-religious secularism, irreligious secularism, irreligious secularism, and religious secularism. And underneath each category, you can find different categorizations used by scholars from sociology, religious sociology, from political science, and from other, and from philosophy, of course, trying to describe different variants and different orientations within the secular trend. The same also within Islam, that within Islamism, I mean, we can find different ideologies that could be defined as Islamist ideology. And also I categorize them into four categories, starting with modernized democratic Islamism, which emphasizes the centrality of the Ummah, and which borrows some democratic tools and democratic even concepts and ideals within Islam. The second is traditional authoritarian Islam, which adopted the same patriarchal and traditional form of personalist regimes that dominated pre-modern Muslim communities. Then the semi-theocratic Islamism, in which the ulama, the imam, in religious sense, is the center of the political system. And of course, we may think now about the Wilayat al-Faqih, the Iranian model of Wilayat al-Faqih, but even in many other Sunni models, even for Taliban, and the significance of religious scholars in the political system is overemphasized in this model. So we have this semi-theocratic Islamism, and then we have lost the idealist totalitarian model of Islamism. And you will see the criteria or the definition for each of these models in the. So first question, what do Islamism, secularism exactly mean in the context of Arab Spring? We said it's valid to use secularism concept in the Muslim context, but we need to redefine it in an appropriate way. Islamism doesn't mean Islam. It's modern phenomenon, reflects or refers to ideology and social movement. There are many variants under Islamism and the secularism, and we should take into consideration these differences within or under each concept. And number four, also there are some overlap, and that's why actually I draw this continuum in the form of a horseshoe, because in the extremities of this continuum actually reflects two identical or two analogous models. The anti-religious secularism, this model of, you can say that maybe in China now, or maybe in the previous communist regimes, that the state is very intervening and trying to abolish the presence of existence of religion in the social life and even in the private sphere. And on the other hand, the totalitarian model of Islamism, which is a theoretical model, you can see that this also the state should be intervening not only and controlling not only religious sphere, but in the public religious manifestations in public sphere, but even the private sphere. So the similarity between two extremities are very close. So we can see, for example, that modernized democratic Islamism and religious secularism could be closer to each other than their correspondent, the extremities at their part of continuum, because the distance in their understanding of the nature of the state, the function of the state, or the degree of freedom that should be given to society is close to each other in comparison to their relationship with the extremities of their own part or their own category. So this is the first question, and also you will find all arguments and all discussions regarding this definition in chapter 2. Going to the second question, who negotiated with whom on what during transitional period? And you can find the whole list of Islamist, the relevant Islamist forces in Egypt, and in comparison to the secularist forces in Egypt, and here is also in Tunisia. And you can find some remarks out of that. For example, the Islamic trend in Egypt was divided between many influential actors, Ikhwan or Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafis and ex-jihadists and others. But in case of Tunisia, it was mainly a Nahda movement, and the Salafists were not that important. You can also see that the guardian institutions were part of the military, and the Supreme Court was important were important and actively engaged in confronting Islamic movements, and this was not the case in Tunisia. Because of conflict between Islamists and the secularists, also we can find different causes, but here three things should be highlighted and worth mentioning. The how to manage the transitional period. This was the first point of conflict. Second, the poor performance of Islamist-dominated transitional administration in Tunisia and Egypt. And then, and most important, the process of drafting of the constitution and how this process was faced by many deadlocks and many, even not only conflicts and heated debates within the constituent assemblies themselves, but even these conflicts were transmitted to society. So it was a societal debate and societal conflict around these topics. You can find in chapter 5 the whole chapter 4, I think, chapter 4, you can see the whole list of negotiation rounds, national dialogues, and pact-making attempts in Egypt and also in Tunisia. And you can see how the issue of Islam and the issue of Sharia reference was discussed from all these different attempts. Coming to the last and the most important question in this book, what are the variables that affected the transitional process and the course and outcome of transitional negotiations in Egypt and Tunisia? And here we have this set of three sets of variables. First, related to the macrostructural variables at the state level, at the regime level. Then we have this mesostructural variables at the level of societal organizations. And then we have this micro actor-centric or agent-related variables at the level of the. And out of the examination of these variables, 6 arguments were proposed to explain the different outcomes between what happened in Egypt and what happened in Tunisia. The first 2 arguments related to the nature of the regime itself. So in argument 1, that the pre-transition regime in Egypt, Mubarak's regime, was less secular and was more tolerating to the Islamists in comparison to the Tunisian case. So the Islamists in Egypt, at the beginning of transitional period, they enjoyed great influence on the whole process in comparison to the Islamists in Tunisia, who were totally excluded from the public sphere under the Al regime, and then they started to gain more influence at the beginning of transitional process. The second point related to the nature of transitional administration, and in Tunisia, the debate was civilian between the civil forces, secular forces, and the civil Islamist forces. But in case of Egypt, the military, Supreme Council of Armed Forces, almost had the upper hand almost throughout the transitional period. And the political orientation, the tendency of the military to confront Islamists due to many causes, ideological causes, historical conflicts that emerged again after 50 years. So all these factors put the military as the central power or central gravity during the transitional period, and then the whole negotiations in Egypt were under control and under influence of the military, and this many times this was a cause for failed negotiations in Egypt. Moving to the arguments 3 and 4, these arguments related to the societal organization, the negotiating parties, and civil society. In case of Tunisia, we have this balance of power. We have we can categorize the political scene in Tunisia between 3 different actors: the old regime, the secular democratic forces, and the Islamic democratic forces. And all these parties more or less had an equal share of power. And after a while, after short period of confrontations, they realized that no one had enough power to impose his own agenda on the others. So they opted for compromise because they knew that they don't have enough power to impose their own preferences. But in case of Egypt, we had this interesting dynamic. It's called by one of the scholars seesaw, this seesaw swing between Islamists and the secularists. in the beginning, Islamists had an upper hand because of or thanks to successive electoral or landslide electoral victories in the parliamentary elections, in presidential elections, and also in the Constitutional Assembly. But then the military started to intervene more and more, and the Supreme Court started to intervene more and more, and they started to curb the Islamist majoritarianism in Egypt until reaching the point of military coup. And in either cases, the one who is powerful felt not obliged to do any concession because they felt that now we are powerful enough and no need to do any concessions or try to find middle ground with our rivals. So this seesaw swing in the power balance was a factor of instability in a transitional period in Egypt, and also in both cases they hindered the progress of negotiations. The second factor in the mesostructural variables related to the civil society. And in short, civil society in Tunisia was more autonomous and was more skillful. And that's why the Quartet Committee, these four organizations that won the Nobel Prize for Peace, thanks to their effort in mediating the negotiations between Islamists and the secularists in Egypt and Tunisia in the summer of 2013, civil society there was powerful enough and was independent enough to intervene and to mediate and to impose some pressures here and there to get the agreement done, to have this compromise to be achieved. So in Tunisia, the civil society was strong and independent. Comparing it to Egypt, the civil society was weakened, opted, and was integral part of the debate in a way that couldn't, even civil society in Tunisia was an integral part of the debate and the conflict in the street. But in a specific moment, they were autonomous enough and they were independent enough to take a step back and to act as a mediator. But in case of Egypt, they failed to do so. The last two arguments related to agents, we can simply say that the first argument related to the elite's unity, and by unity mean that negotiation rounds were better representative or relevant elites were included in negotiations, and these elites who were engaging in the negotiation had secured leadership position within their constituencies. So if you have a negotiation, and in these negotiations, important elites are excluded, or the elites on the table were not really secure enough leadership position in their parties, their organizations, they will be reluctant to do any concessions. They can't afford doing or taking hard decisions. But in Tunisia, we have those three important figures: the Ghannouchi within the Islamists, and Qaid al-Sibsi within the secularists, and Hussein al-Abbasi within the civil society organization, the head of the Secretary General of Labor Union. Those three figures, they had secured leadership position, and that's why they could take hard decisions and do concessions for the success of negotiations, especially during the summer 2013. But this structure of leadership was not there in the case of Egypt. Last argument related also to elite was about the elite equality, and simply we can say that the mediators of Tunisian negotiations, namely the Quartet organizations, they were more skillful in mediating and preparing for negotiations than the mediators in the Egyptian case. And of course, the Islamist elites in Tunisia were more pragmatic and were more skillful, flexible. That's why they could manage to deal with the hardship of negotiations. But in the case of Egypt, they were under severe ideological polarization, so they couldn't really do much they didn't show much flexibility that could protect them from the crackdown that happened after the military coup. Just finally, we have four concluding remarks here. Number one, if you are doing any research on the issue of Islamism and secularism, please find your own definition and try to find how different actors perceive these concepts rather than going into the common cliches about separation between church and the state, or the idea that Islamism is comprehensive Islam, and all these common cliches. Second, the transitional process is a very complicated and very exceptional experience indeed. So there is no golden rules. For example, it's one of the golden rules that you can see in all transitional literature, that please have elite pact, have an agreement between elites, so you can have very controlled and very smooth transition. But what happened in Egypt, for example, that the idea of supra-constitutional pact, it was a chronic source of tension and problems, because Islamists see these attempts as a way to hollow out their victory in election. So this was like a common cause and a common source of polarization and street clashes between Islamists and the secularists. The third point here, that there is a paradox here in transitional process. The transitional process, classically speaking, should be managed by the opposition. And opposition here, by opposition here, we mean like political parties, civil societies, and social movements. But these particular organizations are usually weakened and co-opted by the previous regime. So they could have the power to challenge the regime or even to topple the regime, but they are not really ready to take over power and to manage a very complicated process of transition. So we need to pay more attention about this point, this problem, this paradox, that the co-opted and weakened and suppressed actors, they are responsible for managing a very turbulent, very unstable process of transition. So how can we really find a middle ground, way out from this paradox? This is very important for successful transition. And another paradox related to the transitional negotiations itself, and I will end by this point, that during transitional period, all oppressed groups came to the transition by the idea of now or never. So now this is the moment that our long-awaited demands should be fulfilled now, should be taken seriously now by transitional administration. And the transitional administration, really, they are very busy by securing the day-to-day events, the security, the economy, and all this stuff. So transition negotiations, we can say, generally speaking, they are characterized by very the political forces came to this table with no patience. It's now or never. We need our demands to be realized now. And this demand during transitional period is very hard to be discussed and accepted. And while time passes, these negotiators or these parties became less patient and became more aggressive. And this was the cause of failure in some of these negotiation rounds. So transitional process is full of many paradoxes regarding the process itself and the nature of the relationship between the ousted regime and the newcomers to the regime, and also how to manage transitional negotiations that really could work amid this in the impatient political forces and the very turbulent context. So this, in short, the major questions that I addressed in my book, and these are the concluding remarks. And thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that we are coming close to the end of this session. But I must say that it was a very engaging, very refreshing, and of course, very enriching session. And we have almost observed many things from distant countries like Egypt and Tunisia. And of course, we are trying to make these kind of discussions more frequently for our Indian audiences and Indian friends. And I just would like to tell you that in India, the studies of Middle Eastern affairs may not be that rich. That is why the scholarship on Middle Eastern affairs is still far more limited than what we see in Turkey or other Middle Eastern countries. Yes, there should be much more interest in Middle Eastern affairs, and especially from academic point of view. But I must say that still Indian scholars and Indian universities have to invest more and more efforts to understand the Middle Eastern affairs. And that is why I think that your lecture today is going to help us a lot, and going to help us, and especially the student scholars who are trying to understand the what happened to the Arab uprising, and why these Arab uprisings were reversed and failed, and the issues in the transition. So from that point of view, this lecture is going to be very useful for longer term, because we are also going to upload part of this lecture on social media, and also we are going to document a report, and of course there will be a book review on our website on this book. And I believe that this book is going to get more attention among Indian readers as well, and Indian scholars. So I must thank you for this opportunity, and I must thank all of my friends and participants who have taken part in today's lecture. And I, on behalf of all our friends, I'm thanking you again. And thank you very much, Kashif, and other team members of CSPS who have wonderfully organized this session. And I look forward all of you once again for another session very soon. So thank you very much. I am closing here now.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure being with you.